What if I told you everything you've ever known about government, law, and freedom was a lie? Let's start with something few understand. Man cannot make law. True law is not written, it is discovered. It is eternal, it is divine. It is woven into the very fabric of creation. Blackstone wrote, "This law of nature, being coeval with mankind and dictated by God himself, is of course superior in obligation to any other. What men write down, statutes, codes, ordinances, are not laws. They are administrative rules. At best, they regulate commerce. At worst, they enslave. Man-made law only applies to those deemed incompetent or wards of the state, those who cannot self-govern. This is the dirty secret. Unless you've asserted your standing under divine and common law, the state assumes your property, a vessel, a dead entity. In 1933, the U.S. government, bankrupt and under control of international financiers, declared a national emergency. Under the Emergency Banking Relief Act and House Congressional Record, March 9, 1933, page 83, it mortgaged the estates of the American people, your labor, your home, your children. You became surety for a national debt you never agreed to. Birth certificates became trust instruments. Your estate converted into collateral. A satanic inversion of inheritance. This isn't new. This is ancient. Babylon imposed tribute. Rome imposed citizenship through conquest. London refined it through maritime law and central banking. All three were ruled by merchant oligarchs, gold hoarders, temple bankers, secret societies. Their goal? Not to serve man, but to become gods over man. To digitize the soul. To deny the Creator his rightful jurisdiction. Now, the final phase begins. A digital matrix. AI judges, programmable currency, social credit scores. Every person tracked, tagged, taxed. And they'll say it's all for your safety. But remember this, a person is not one of we the people. The person is a mask, an artificial identity created by the system to control the man or woman made in God's image. The founders of America knew this danger. Jefferson warned, "The natural progress of things is for liberty to yield and government to gain ground." They built a republic rooted in common law, where the people were sovereign and government was servant. That republic was slowly overtaken, not by war, but by paper, debt, and deceit. It is time to remember law is not in the books. It is in your soul. God's law is simple. Do no harm. Keep your word. Seek justice. Walk humbly. Any system that violates that, whether Rome or a smart contract, is lawless. You were not born to be collateral. You are not a ward. You are not a number. You are living, breathing evidence of divine law. And now, you must choose. Will you live as a subject in their digital Babylon? Or will you reclaim your estate and walk as a sovereign under God's law? Learn more by searching Burn the Corporate Fiction on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and X.
Ooh, the social media platforms are really going to hate that one. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Burn the Corporate Fiction. I hope everyone is doing well this evening. That video ties right into tonight's topic, which, of course, is why I made it. Babylonian money magic, right? So a fundamental concept that everyone has to truly, and don't believe me, this isn't about whether you're an atheist or you have a relationship with the Creator. That makes no difference. You cannot be a true student of the law unless you understand that the concept of a Creator is the fount of authority for all law. And this is not my words. These are William Blackstone, John Locke, these common law, natural law jurists, right? Whom the founders drew heavily upon to create this republic. They will all tell you that, like, the law of nature, nature's God, is coeval with the creation of man, and it takes precedence over any other law, anything, right? And that law is not written; it is discovered, it is written about, but it cannot be created by man. And the reason I want to bring up this topic this evening to kind of add to our right to travel series that we've been doing the last few podcasts is because if you truly understand why and how man cannot create law, they can only regulate property or regulate commerce and property under administration, meaning you're a ward, an infant, you're not of age, you're incompetent, you're a pauper. There's some reason that the government has taken you under their charge, and now they can regulate you as property and any property that you happen to acquire as an extension of their property. That is the only way they can make any rules that man can follow. This is where the term color of law comes from. Okay, something takes, so everybody's heard, I'm sure if you've come across this channel, you've heard of the U.S. Code deprivation of rights under the color of law. Well, what does that mean exactly? Right? What does that mean? Deprivation of rights under the color of law, right? Something only takes the color of law when you consent to it. Otherwise, it's just an arbitrary rule regulating commerce or property under administration. Now, if you are who's under administration or you're engaging in commercial activity within, and that's that municipality's domain, then those regulations only as far as they regard your business activities apply to you, but they still do not affect your personal property rights, especially when you're in the private. Okay? The only things in this republic or any Western, like the Australia, England, Ireland, any of these nations where common law has been the law of the land for, centuries upon centuries up until recently, all of these nations, when you're in the private, the only thing that applies to you is essentially do not violate somebody's will. Okay, do not violate another's free will and honor your word. That's where the common law of contracts and the concept of a crime requiring a victim come from. Something only takes the color of law when you consent to be under it. So you can look at private law, statutory law, codes, canons, rules, regulations, whatever you want to call them. All of these things are the result of a contract or trust arrangement of some sort that you must have consented or been presumed to be a part of, right, in order for those things to take the color of law and apply to you. Otherwise, they absolutely do not apply to you. They're arbitrary rules of some corporate municipality or some corporation that they're trying to apply to you. Okay, so before I go further into that, let me say hi to those of you who have made it to the chat so far. We've got LJ, the Chaldeans, must be referring to the Babylonians. Mojo Shop, good to see you. Deb, Adorable's here with us. Good to see you. We got Pat, Eldon Bean, and Theo. Looks like so. Good to see you guys. Right. So, okay, this concept's very important to understand about why man cannot create law. Is why they have to create these trust roles for you, these trust relationships, right, or this trust arrangement for you to agree to adopt, because then you are their creature. It simply goes like this, right? And I'm going to share the screen for you guys. Let's just share the whole window, why not, right? As always, I draw heavily on Blackstone's commentaries. It's been said that the colonists prior to the revolutions, all colonists who knew what was going on, had two books in their house, in their home. One was obviously the Holy Bible. The other one was Blackstone's commentaries. Okay, they had all 4 volumes, and generally back then people were much more knowledgeable in the law than they are today, obviously, because everybody's gotten lazy and become infantile. They don't even want to do the work necessary to learn how the law operates. And instead, when they see one of my shorts or they just come across one of my podcasts for a few minutes, they want to go, oh, that's pseudo-legal bullshit, when I can prove everything I say. And you guys, if you've been subscribed to the channel for a long time, you know that I prove everything that I say, unless I'm telling you it's a theory. And I say, hey, this is my theory, I can't prove it. But when it comes to the law, I'm telling you, and I prove it. But people are so lazy, they just want to dismiss it. But you know why? Because it would require action on their part. If what I'm saying is true, and it is true, then they feel convicted in their soul to do something. The issue is they're too lazy and cowardly to do something about it. And that is the general predisposition of most of your normies who come across anything to do with common law and how the law really works. It's too much work to learn that stuff. You have to do mental acrobats um, to understand these concepts, comprehend these concepts. So Black's Law, this is what I draw heavily upon. I've read 3 out of 4 of these volumes. The fourth one I feel like doesn't really apply as much, but let's see here. Okay, we want to go here. What Blackstone says about dependency. So administration, let's first start with administration. All these concepts, especially when it relates to trust, are derived from the Bible, 100% from the Bible. I am of the opinion, and I can pretty much prove it, especially in Western law, that all law is derived from the Bible. And either it's an inversion of it or it is in concordance with it. An inversion of it would be communism, is a perfect example of how law becomes, how man's law, which is just statutory rules, regulations, all that, becomes an inversion of God's law, quite intentional. And the way they do it is through commerce. So the concept of trust in its very origin was birthed from the ingenuity of fraud. And what I mean is the concept of trust was created by the church as a way to hold property while sidestepping the statutes of mortmain from King Edward I that kept any non-living entity from holding property. It's one of the reasons that trusts started to come into common usage, but also because of William the Conqueror introducing feudalism. Okay, so trust, or let's put it, administration, when somebody dies without a will, okay, when somebody dies without a will, it's called dying intestate. And their property automatically goes to, especially in England, goes to the state or the church, as it was then, to be disposed of, basically given to the heirs, whoever the case may be, right? And that happens if you die intestate. That's called administration. So when you die intestate, or here even in the States, if you die without a will, your property goes to the state to be administered. And the state is supposed to interpret what they think you would want done with the property, which of course you know that doesn't happen, right? Or see what they find equitable to do with the property. Holy smokes, Eddie. Wow, man. Thank you. Eddie, hold the line, just sent $100 super chat. And he said, if I can find my mouse, he said, thanks to you, I saved hundreds of dollars on a traffic ticket. If I could send more, I would. This information is priceless. Man, listen, you sent more than, I mean, that's incredible. Thank you. I actually, honestly, I'm like taken aback by that. That's a huge super chat. I appreciate that, man. Definitely don't send more. That's a lot of money, man. All right. Wow. Okay, so back to administration. And yes, Eddie did fight a traffic ticket, and he did save hundreds of dollars, and it was pretty impressive. And it was an excellent learning experience for the Jurist Society, as well as he himself. He handled it very well. He's very knowledgeable on what he does in the law. So we got A.T. Bing. Says, evening, Ryan. Folks in chat. We got Grouch also joined the party. Good to see you. All right. So administration. You die without a will. Your property comes under administration of the state, because no property shall go to waste or sit abandoned. That's the whole thing about property, and that's how the law views property. It shall not go to waste. I'm going to try not to bore you guys and just kind of race through this a little bit to get to the topic of tonight. But so if you die without a will, your property comes under administration. Now, if you die with a will, but your heir is not of age, the heir comes under administration along with the estate until he can prove that he's of age. And what ended up being called the Court of Wards, or the Court of Wards and Liveries. Not going to get into all that. And the other way you come under administration is if you're a pauper and you require assistance to live, like you cannot subsist on your own estate and you need welfare, you need housing, food, shelter, and all that, then by operation of law, needing that stuff, those benefits, automatically places you under the administration of whoever's providing the benefits for you. And then they can regulate your property. So we're looking at all the ways that the state can actually control people and property, and it's called administration. And it can only happen under specific circumstances. So I'll recap what we just went through. If you die without a will, if you die with a will, but your heir is not of age, or if you're an incompetent, like you're crazy, you're a spendthrift, you're a drunkard, you're one of those things, right? Or um, if you're a pauper and you require welfare, then you come under administration. This is an entire body of law that's been built up over the last 1,000 years, ever since the Magna Carta, because that's where the concept really originated. And what happens when you're placed under administration is you're automatically placed in the position of trustee of your own estate. And the concept comes from the understanding of the creator and how dependency works as an operation of natural law. That's what I'm going to show you here. Okay, shows you that man considered as a creature, meaning man is created, must necessarily be subject to the laws of his creator. Now, this is universal. This is another universally applicable aspect of law that stems from natural law and the understanding that we are created, and then is translated down into society and commerce and allows them to control what they create. And that's why they create the persona for you. That's why they create the trust for you to adopt in exchange for benefits, because you can always control what you create in the same way that God is. We're subject to God's law because we're created beings. That's how deeply this spiritual knowledge of the law runs, that it even allows them to operate their inversion. What they're doing today is an exact satanic inversion of the original operation of law, where God created man, so man is subject to God's laws. Well, hey, we created this artificial person, this legal fiction, and when you adopt it, now you're our creature. So we don't care what God says. We're going to make you do whatever we want, right? Now, it gets deeper. And it says, because you're dependent, it says, a being independent of any other has no rule to pursue, but such as he prescribes to himself. And that's true. If you haven't contracted into society, you're not indebted to anybody, and you're not beholden to anybody for benefits or any kind of sustenance, right? Then the only thing you're subject to is God. It says, but a state of dependence will inevitably oblige the inferior to take the will of him on whom he depends as the rule of his conduct. Not indeed in every particular, right? But in all those points wherein his dependence consists. Well, here's the issue with being a 14th Amendment citizen. The entire existence of that legal entity is owed to the federal corporation, is a creature of the federal corporation. Everything that it is allowed or not allowed to do is entirely at the mercy of Congress. That's why they made it. And they had to do that because man cannot create law. So they had to trick you into adopting a creature of the state, into adopting the persona of a creature of the state, so that they can regulate this creature. And they don't regulate you at law either. It's all you. They regulate you in equity, because all trusts are enforced in equity. And the 14th Amendment citizenship itself is a trust by itself, right? It's quite interesting. It's always had a separate status from the people, right? So it's always had from the people of the states. So first, obviously, we'll recap a couple things like we do every time, just to make sure everybody gets this. And now, one thing I do want to add here is that all law revolves around property and the descent of property, okay? There's no aspect of law that does not regard property. That is what law is all about. And your relationship to your estate, your property, determines the law you're under. So if you're not under administration, nobody has a superior interest in your estate through debt or through presumption of incompetence or through infancy, then you are not subject to whatever rules and regulations they try to prescribe for you. So I'm going to show you something. This is the Organic Acts. Well, first we'll go to the Magna Carta. And the very first things they're talking about is heirs. Number 3, but if an heir of such person is underage in a ward, when he comes of age, he shall have his inheritance without relief or without fine. Right? So this is about inheritance. The guardian of the land of the heirs underage shall take only reasonable revenue. That's called administration. That's what they're talking about. So this is 1215. Let's jump all the way up to the late 1700s for the Organic Acts of the Territories. And the very first thing it starts talking about is that the estates, both of resident and non-resident proprietors in the said territory dying intestate, shall descend to and be distributed among their children. This is all law revolves around. People have to understand this. If you read the Bible, that's all law revolves around, is descent, lineage, and descent of property. And also the trust that was that we are placed in under God. In God we trust. That's why they put it in your face right on the dollar bill. They're telling you this trust relationship sanctioned by God. You agreed to it. All trusts are in God. They take place under God. That which you bind on earth, I'll bind in heaven. That which you loose on earth, I'll loose in heaven. It's pretty crazy. We got Carol showed up. I'll take this opportunity just to detract actually and tell you guys I am presenting at the International Truth Expo November 7th, 8th, and 9th, along with Mark Sargent and Dr. Andrew Kaufman and several others. There's a promo code for Burn the Corporate Fiction where you can save $50 on a 3-day pass. It's in the description of this podcast right here. And I hope to see you guys there. It should be a lot of fun. Got music. We're going to be camping, hanging out with, like-minded, truth-oriented individuals. And there will be a plethora of topics spoken about, not just the law, flat earth, and pretty much runs the gambit. And everybody seems to be the top of their area of expertise who's presenting. So, all right, back to this. So this all has to do with property and the descent. That's all law ever has to do with, right? So that's why they need to reduce you to property so they can regulate you, because only property, only matter that has no will of its own can be regulated, right? So let's go to, well, before we even go to the Black's Law real quick, let me pull up this document for you guys, because this is one of the best law books you'll ever read. And if I could not recommend it enough, and it will really give you an idea of what's going on in this country, because it describes the American law of administration, which is just the English law of administration, except for the people are sovereign as long as they're not under administration. It gives you a great concept of not only the spiritual nature of the law, but also what exactly administration is, why we call the various forms of government administrations, and what it is to be administered and under administrative law. See, the people are not supposed to be under administration. That's why the government, Chisholm v. Georgia, has the same relationship to the people as a regent would to a king over in Europe. They are beneath us. Okay, so a treatise on the American law. And there it is. All right, so let me pull this up real quick. Let me make sure it's volume, we need volume 1. So I'm pretty sure, yep. All right. And this entire book tells you all the different presumptions and every different tactic that can be used to place you and your estate under administration. So as soon as it's a big book. It's like 1,000 pages or something crazy, right? So, whoops, I have no idea why that just popped up. All right, well, while that's opening, we'll go over to Black's Law real quick, and we'll take a look at the 14th Amendment. All right, so the 14th Amendment, this is the trust persona that they created, the creature of the corporate state that they can control, because the creator controls the created, right? So when you adopt this, you come under their administration. It tells you right here, it became part of the organic law, July 28th, 1868, and its importance entitles it to special mention. It creates, or at least recognizes for the first time, a citizenship of the United States, as distinct from that of the states. Okay, so the people created the states created the federal government, and the federal government created the 14th Amendment citizen. It's the bottom of the food chain, all the way at the bottom. Now, another thing that they don't say here is that the 14th Amendment makes it so you cannot question the public debt that you're used as collateral for, as public chattel, and that it reapportions representatives. It just completely restructured government entirely to place the federal corporation at the top and allow it to expand its jurisdictional influence to within the boundaries of the states. We got Chicago Cubby Bear. We got De Akinator. Good to see you guys. Yep, I think that's JJ Hempcrete Bear. Good to see you, man. All right, trying to keep up with you guys as you guys come in. Now let's see if this thing opened up yet. Whew, man, that took forever. All right, so we want to go up a little bit, down, definitely down a little bit more than that. So billion freaking cases cited, which is how you know it's a good treatise. Okay, talking about wills, capricious will, nature of property. So look, my property is that which is mine. That only is mine which I acquire, hold, and dispose of by my will. This is the other spiritual aspect of law. It is my will which determines the acquisition of a thing by me, whether originally by reducing to possession and thus making my property which was no one's property before, or by contract, by which a thing becomes mine through the concurrence of my will with the will of its former owner, with that of its former owner. Okay, so does that mean that you acquire property by will? Okay, it's your free will that determines your choice of property and that causes you to labor towards acquiring it. That's why property is sacred. That's why it is the foundation of law, is the concept of property, private property, personal property, public property. Property is the bedrock of your study of law. So since I cannot rightfully acquire the property of another without his consent, that is, without his free will, it is obvious that the will of the original owner is a necessary element in my ownership, and that the ownership of anyone who may lawfully acquire it after me, and remains operative until the property has lost its character as such by voluntary abandonment. And now this is an important aspect to understand too. By my own free will, I may abandon my property, whereupon it ceases to be such and relapses into the condition of res nullius, or like just a null thing. Think about that. Your freedom over your property, your sovereignty, has to do with your ability to freely alienate property as well, to be able to dispose of it without permission, without being told how to sell it, how to abandon it, how to leave it, right? Well, think about it. Does that apply to your life right now? Like, yeah, you can throw inconsequential property away, or you can sell inconsequential property. But if you want to sell a car, what do you got to do? Transfer the title. Make sure that the DMV or the Secretary of State's notified of the title transfer and all that crazy stuff, so that they can get their tax money and all that. That is directly affecting your right to property. That shows you that car is not yours. And of course it's not. It's got the state's commercial advertising on the back of it. It says the state's name, and then it's got an account number attached to the state's creature, right? This creature, this corporate state. I hold or use a thing which is mine at will. Matter is unfree, and that's why they reduce you to property. They reduce you to chattel property. There's actually a slave case that I've got pulled up somewhere. Bear with me for a second, because I was just looking at this. Did I leave it open? I hope I did. Let's see, versus McIntosh. It's going to be. Well, I'll explain it to you guys real quick. The case was basically about a ship. They ran out of supplies. It was a slave ship. They ran out of like fresh water and stuff like that. So they started throwing the slaves overboard. And this was an English case, English report. They started throwing the slaves overboard. And they tried to hold the insurance company liable to pay for the slaves that they threw overboard, right? And the argument was, well, they were slaves, this and that is living people. We only cover property. And then the court ruled, well, slaves are chattel property. Servants and slaves are chattel property. Okay, so this is not a case of throwing living people overboard. The law looks at it as a case of throwing goods overboard, which is insane, right? Which is insane, but that is the truth. And see, that is how the government looks at you, right? So this is this Democratic National Convention complaint, or committee complaint against the Russian Federation, General Staff of the Armed Forces, and all this good stuff. Of course, Donald J. Trump, Roger Stone, all that. Well, that's not why I'm showing you this, and we're definitely not getting into the MAGA versus the libtard things, magtard versus libtard. We're not getting into that. What we are going to get into is the charges that they used, right? So this was over election interference, okay? So the Democratic National Committee saying that these entities, the Russian Federation and all that stuff, interfered with their election. Well, look at how this translates to a charge at law. Trespass to chattels. Trespass to chattels. They're saying you influenced our chattel property. You trespassed on our chattel. Talking about the fucking voters, man. The voters, they're telling you, your chattel, right here, conspiracy to commit trespass on chattels, right? So we got Iron Horse, good to see you. You said they weren't throwing them overboard. They went to the galley to become long pork. That's gross. No, they definitely did. It was in the case. They threw some of them over. But hey, yeah, that's probably possible too, that they took some of them, and if they were low on food, no telling. I mean, if they're already just treating people as property and hucking them overboard and calling it, oh, we're just throwing our goods overboard. Like, okay, well, then you're pretty much capable of whatever. But so conspiracy to commit trespass on chattels, right? That's how they look at it. All right, so matter's unfree. So chattel property is unfree. It has no will of its own, right? The 14th Amendment citizen is chattel property. It has to be. It would the status was created for the newly freed slave, and the newly freed slave could not actually be free, right? We got Catch 22 in the house too. How'd I miss you? Where you at? Okay, I see you, Crip Rick. Good to see you. All right, so the 14th Amendment, it was made for the newly freed slaves, and the newly freed slaves could not actually exercise unalienable rights at common law, because remember, like I said, that requires independence, and these individuals had been property, and they had all of their material needs. I'm not saying like it was great, but they had their material needs met: to food, shelter, clothing, and they had to labor in exchange. That was their arrangement. They did not have trades or professions whereby they could subsist and be free, right? So we'll bounce over here to the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776, the original one, right? And section 36, it tells you, as every free man to preserve his independence, if without sufficient estate, meaning your estate's not producing on its own to supply you, like you have investments or whatever, right? It says, ought to have some profession, calling, trade, or farm whereby he may honestly subsist. There can be no necessity for nor use in establishing offices of profit. Offices of profit are welfare offices. Okay, those are the administration of the poor, who these people, discreet men of the county, wealthy men generally, are appointed to these offices where they can maintain the poor for a fee. They get to take snippets of the pauper's estate as a fee, and then they regulate the pauper as property because they're poor. They're charged to the estate, so they become chattel, right? And they're no longer free. They're under administration. And it tells you this is the operation of law, just like Blackstone did. It tells you this is natural operation. To preserve your independence, you have to be able to take care of yourself. Otherwise, we have to establish basically a welfare office. And they tell you the usual effects right here. The usual effects of which are dependence and servility, unbecoming of freemen, because you're dependent on them now. They give you food, shelter, and tell you where to work. And then you're also their servant. You serve them because they administer your property. You have to use your property the way they tell you to, right? Now they've done this to the whole nation. They mortgaged your estate in 1933 for the benefit of being able to engage in commercial enterprise. That's literally how they look at it. And the whole thing created an unwritten trust existing outside and parallel to the Constitution and our original common law framework of government. So, all right, let's get back here to this American law of administration. So, matter is unfree. I think we nailed that. It has no will. It does not belong to itself. Neither right nor duty can be predicated of a mere thing, right? That's why things are dealt with in rem. That's why they need to reduce you to a thing to pull you into rem, because the corporate state couldn't deal with you as a living man or woman. They need you to be property. They need you to be in rem. You have to be. Otherwise, they cannot even deal with you. So, its quality is to offer resistance, matter that is. It is therefore negative to my will. My will, in realizing itself, overcomes this resistance and subjects the thing to its purposes, changing its form, destroying, consuming it. Most importantly, infusing your creative essence, right? Your creative essence into the property, which makes it an extension of your free will, an ultimate realization of your free will. Think about that. Making real what before was intangible, your will, is made real by the property you acquire. It is the most sacred thing in your life. And the fact that you're taxed, fined, and feed for the use and misuse of it is an abhorrent satanic inversion of the trust that God placed us in. There's no other way to look at it. All right. That which is mine is thus part of my personality, of me, insofar as its end and purpose of existence is the satisfaction and realization of my will. That is why you acquire property, and to serve it for its purposes as my bodily limbs serve me. Will, then, is the essence of property. And see how this all goes back to free will, which all goes back to the knowledge of good and evil, which is what they manipulate with the credit debt system, positive, negative, using what I like to call, and other people have called, Babylonian money magic to enslave you. And it literally is. See, the mortgage, it's a curious thing. The mortgage is part of an ancient system going all the way back to time immemorial, ancient Greece and before mortgages existed. It's called a death pledge, and it's always been that. And you're basically pledging your property. It's almost like a complete transfer of title. And you're pledging your property to whoever's lending you the money in exchange for the loan of the money. And mortgages historically have always been set up so that you cannot get out of them, and that the individual ends up ultimately owning the property. You know what I mean? Sorry, cat was being annoying to throw water at him. But anyway, it was treated as a complete transfer of title. Now, the interesting thing about it, even though the title wasn't actually transferred, is that the reason it's called a dead pledge is because whatever property is mortgaged is considered dead to the individual who owns it while the loan is outstanding. Here's the kicker. You were mortgaged. The United States citizen was what was mortgaged. So you are dead while the loan is outstanding. You are dead to the law. It's another reason why the judge wears a black robe. He's a black robe priest of death. He's Osiris up there with the phallus of Osiris, the gavel, and the whole thing is an Egyptian death cult, ancient Babylonian death cult. It's the same Babylonian money magic they were using in Jesus's time and before. The money changers he kicked out of the temple, these courts are temples, man. The courts are temples. That's what they are. They're designed like synagogues. They have pews and all that stuff in there, right? The 3 tiers going up to where the judge sits, and he sits up there as a priest. It's a temple, and they're doing black magic rituals to enslave you, fleece you, and trap you into a beast system. And they want to make it permanent with AI and digital currency. They want to forever integrate this creature, their creature. And I'll reiterate that point. What's up, Ryan? Good to see you. I want to underline that point, that as a creature of God, we're subject to God's laws. But if we're independent of all other men, Cruden v. Neal, if we're independent of the institutions of our fellow men, absent consent, right? That's what Cruden v. Neal says. But we're still subject to God because God created us, and the creator is always in control of the created. This is why they create a creature that is a chattel property trust persona that you adopt. And now they become the satanic inverted creator over you and arbiter of your life, and they legislate your behavior according to their whim, their wills, and their capriciousness, whatever fancies them. And oftentimes it's highly negative. I mean, let's honestly think about what you're given in return for being a 14th Amendment citizen. Okay, so what did you have as one of we the people? You had all of your unalienable common law rights, your right to life, freedom of locomotion, everything that comes with being free, your right to absolute ownership of property, and you can acquire, sell, dispose of it however you see fit, right? You had the unlimited right to contract, which you still have because they're not going to take that from you. It's the devil's greatest tool. You had the unlimited right to contract. Most importantly, you had the ability, beyond all else, the natural right to protect yourself, your property, and your rights by any means necessary against tyranny. That's what you had as one of we the people. Now, what did you get when you signed up to be a 14th Amendment infant? Well, just like the newly freed slaves, they were offered privileges and immunities, which are issued and protected by Congress through legislation and can be altered or abolished at any time by Congress, right? And you had the right to be used as collateral as public property. But because you were public property, right, they would protect you, and they'd protect your civil rights. Okay, so there's that misnomer, civil rights. Again, man cannot grant you rights. Civil rights are just an a misleading term for privileges and immunities. They're not actually rights. Rights are right. It's called right because it's what's right, what's just right. It's what's inherently you have the just divine authority to engage in these actions. That's your right, okay? Privileges and immunities are just exactly that, and they can be taken away at any time. So let's take a look at some of these privileges and immunities. You have the right to be gay, okay? You have the right to not only be that, but to be like totally twisted and cosplay a chick and then go read to little kids. All right. I didn't know that needed to be a right. Okay. Because it's not. It would actually be absolutely unlawful. You go back to a common law society, you go back about 200 years and go try to do that shit. See what happens. See what happens to you. Right? So you had that. You got the right to abortion. Didn't know that was a right anybody had, but it's not. It's a privilege. And see how they're creating this inverted facsimile of actual rights, but they're twisted. It's a twisted facsimile of actual rights that they're instituting. It's insane, right? So Chicago Cubby Bear says, got stopped by a cop the other day. He asked me, you know why I pulled you over? I said, well, I assume because you're gay. No, that's pretty good, man. Yeah. So you figured I was bored and could probably use some government in my life, right? You're seeing me drive down the road, and you're like, you know what, that guy could use some government. I think I'm going to go ahead and pull him over and give him some government. Sounds like a good idea. Fucking dicks. All right. Yeah. So the civil rights trick. It's a big trick. It's privileges and immunities, and what they offer you is usually at the expense of actual rights. So take like your civil rights against hate speech, right? Because you're a protected class of minority of whatever, either deviant or immigrant or whatever you happen to be here, right? You're this protected class minority, and they say you have a right against hate speech. Well, that's not actually a right. Nobody has a right to control what other people say. They have a right to whether or not they want to listen. They can leave. They don't have to listen, but you don't have a right to what they say. And so what they're actually doing is calling something a privilege or a right while using it to take away the actual common law right of somebody's free expression. It's a communist tactic. It is an entire inversion. So, okay, I've harped on that enough. Let's move on. All right, so we say that. Now there's one more thing I wanted to point out in this particular document. And let's see, Rose, I think it's the next page. It's one of the most important quotes in here, and I really want to share it with you guys because right here. So he says, operation of the owner's will after his death. And this is why the state can take control of your property if you do not have a will. That's why they presume you, as one of we the people, to be missing, presumed dead, and without a will. That's what they did in the Set the KV Act, so they could take everybody's property and use it as collateral for the Bank of England. That's what Emperor Nero did thousands of years ago to take control of all the property in Rome and turn everybody into chattel property under the empire. So it's very important to understand this aspect of what they're doing, because they consider you to be beyond the sea, missing, presumed dead, with no will, so your property is under administration. This is also why you can claim your property and why you have to claim your property on the record, like I've been saying. This right here is the exact reason why you have to claim, because now they cannot make that presumption. The entire IRS presumption, the entire tax chattel presumption is that you are a infant trustee and chattel of a decedent estate under the administration of the federal corporation and used for the benefit of the federal corporation. Okay? Because the actual owner of the estate is missing, presumed dead. That is also you, but that is you as a state citizen, as one of we the people, which they will never recognize you as. Because if they do, then all of everything they're doing falls apart. So they're bringing you in as somebody who's basically maintaining an estate for them under their administration and performing the obligations of the estate. Right? So Very important. So right here, and he explains why. He says, property then is the realization of the free will of a person, the external sphere of his freedom. That's what your property is the external sphere of your freedom, and your relationship to your property is exactly that. It determines whether or not you're free or you're a slave. Somebody else has a superior interest, you're a slave. As such, it partakes of and is clothed with the dignity and inviolability of the person. The things which constitute property can have no rights, for they have no will. And will alone, or the person in which it has its abode and vehicle, can be the subject or right and of its, or can be the subject of right and of its correlative duty. So the will of the matter, it has no will itself. It is merely determined by you. The property's will is your will. It is the abode and vehicle of your will, is what he's saying, right? So the law recognizes and deals with property only insofar as it recognizes and deals with the will of the owner, realized or externalized therein. That's why they don't even deal with us at law. They deal with us at equity, because at law you could challenge the presumption of infancy, decedents, and all that. You could challenge it right there in a court of law. So they locked you out of law by making you a permanent trustee of a decedent estate, and then abolishing the distinction between law and equity, and abolishing the distinction between admiralty and civil actions, and just blended everything together so that you could not have access to law. See, as long as you're locked into the position of trustee of your own estate, which they don't see as your estate, trust can only ever be adjudicated in equity. And I harp on this all the time, and I'll show you guys something about it momentarily. But this is what I wanted to get to. It says, for the sphere of the law is the spiritual. It operates upon and through the will alone. See that? So you cannot even begin to study law unless you understand that the sphere of the law is the spiritual. It operates upon and through the will alone. What is will? Will, you can't quantify it. It's intangible. It's that part of us, that divine spark in us that you cannot even really put words to. What is will? Well, I'll tell you what will is. In one sense, right? When you see a fire, this is how this is that divine spark in us. When you see a forest fire and you see all the animals running away from the fire, yet you see firemen running towards the fire, that's will. Every ounce of their being, every fiber of their being is screaming at them not to go into that fire, but they will against their natural instincts. That's an example of something that is indefinable, that is not quantifiable, and is divine. And the law only ever deals with will. Equity, on the other hand, deals with contracts, prior agreements, and things that are not law, that the law cannot recognize because they are pretend, they are fake things, like a trust relationship, like the role of trustee is a legal fiction. Law cannot deal with that. You can contract into it at law, but once you're into it, it has to be adjudicated in equity because it's all fake rules, right? Regarding the use of the property of the trust, regarding the hierarchy of the trust, who's the trustee, who's the administrator, all that stuff's make-believe. It can't be adjudicated at law. Now, that's not the only thing, and this brings me back to the whole point of tonight, Babylonian money magic, how it was Babylon, then it was Rome, then it was London, and now it's the United States Empire. Is these guys have continually tried to build their Tower of Babel and usurp the sovereign authority of God by reducing God's creation to commercial property and then regulating it and depriving God of his rightful jurisdiction. This is absolutely what they have been doing. I firmly believe that's what the original Tower of Babel was, because the very first commercial laws come out of Babylon. It's called the Hammurabi Code. So what do you, and he introduced the concept of tribute, which was the first kind of tax. And he started regulating people as property and usurping the authority of God, creating his own little creation of a city that's his own little world that he's the god of. That's Hammurabi, right? This is what Babylon. So it's been the same thing every single time now. In equity, right, which is all trusts have to be adjudicated in equity, the judge is God. The judge is literally God. Let me show you guys something. So first, we're going to go to equity here in Black's Law, which I did find. I was going to show you guys the other night. Now I found it because I had to show you. So, well, first we can look at the Constitution, just so you guys know. It's Article 3, Section 2, and then we'll get to Blackstone, and then we'll go to Bouvier's. So we'll go to Constitution, sure, whatever, and we'll go to, we don't want the annotated. We want that's Constitution, Article 3, Section 2. This is important. So, right here, the judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity. And in the actual Constitution, the words law and equity are both capitalized. They are two distinct and separate things. Law is not equity. Equity is not law. What is law? We've been discussing it the whole time. Law cannot be written. It can only be discovered and written about. Law is common law. That is the law of nature and nature's God is applied to society, right? We only recognize these principles, such as the law of dependency, because we recognize that in nature, and then we can translate it into society. When someone is a pauper and dependent, they are subject to that entity they're dependent on the same way man's subject to God, and that is a translation that's common law. It's not written, it's only written about. So there's a distinct difference between law and equity. Equity is the enforcement of contracts, trust arrangements, and also when there is no evidence at law for what you're trying to accomplish, but you feel like you're owed equitable relief, you can go and pray to the judge, essentially, to give you that relief and explain your circumstances, and then it's up to his conscience. And that's why the Bar Association locked us into equity, because then the Bar Association can be God. They don't have to worry about that pesky law and not having any control in the courtroom, because they have no control in the courtroom of law. Court of record, none. All right? So you guys see this. This is Constitution, differentiates law and equity. Very important. Now we're going to go to Blackstone. It says equity, thus depending essentially upon particular circumstances of each individual case, there can be no established. See, that's what I mean. So say you had some property and I saved it. It was on fire and I put it out, and I risked my life to put it out, and I saved your property. And then afterwards I walk up to you and I go, hey man or woman, if I wasn't here, you wouldn't have any property. So I feel like you owe me some equitable relief. Maybe you should give me a few bucks, or maybe let me have that bike over there or something like that, right? And I'm sitting there trying to appeal, because my logic is, well, if I wasn't here, it would all be gone, so you could at least give me something. But the law would look at that and say, well, is he giving you his property of his own free will? Like, did you buy it? Is this an agreement between the two of you? Or are you just trying to enforce an equitable concept on him to get equitable relief, right? The law is not going to deal with that, because he doesn't lawfully owe you anything. Cool, you saved his stuff, but he never asked you to. There's no contract that required you to or guaranteed you compensation for doing so. There's nothing there for you to use that law to enforce that, to make that happen, right? But you can go to a court of equity and you can pray to the judge, who's a priest up there, and you can say, well, this is what happened, and I feel like he owes me this, right? The judge can sit there and say, what do you think? And then that guy can say his piece, and then the judge can go, well, okay, you should give him $100 or something, whatever. But law would never do that. And essentially that judge just robbed you, because that guy has no lawful right to your property. How do you know he didn't set the damn fire just to put it out? You don't know, right? And that's why equity is dangerous. So Blackstone will confirm that for us. Says, so there, because it's each case is individual, there can be no established rules and fixed precepts of equity laid down without destroying its very essence and reducing it to a positive law. So it has to be adapted by the nature of what equity is. It's a case-by-case thing, and it's up to the conscience of the judge. And on the other hand, the liberty of considering all cases in the equitable light must not be indulged too far, lest thereby we destroy all law and leave the decision of every question entirely in the breast of a judge. Because it's all up to the judge in equity. That's why they wanted to trap you into a trust system, because trusts can only ever assert their equitable rights in a court of equity, because you don't have lawful rights to your property. You have equitable rights that are determined by the trust arrangement that you're in. And that's all make-believe rules and regulations. It's man's law. It's private law. It's not actually law. And so law, a court of law cannot recognize it. Only a court of equity can. and it's up to the judge's conscience, and he's God. And if he goes, you can listen to your right to travel, you can listen to all these Supreme Court cases, but he doesn't care about any of that, because what is before him is chattel property of a decedent estate that is a trustee of that estate who has violated their trust obligations. That's all he cares about. And he can know everything you're saying, but because you're not in a court of law to challenge the actual arrangement in the first place, he can just do whatever he wants. And that's how it works. That's why the only option when you're fighting these people is to get your claim on the record, get your standing together, right? And rebut all their presumptions on the record, and then challenge their jurisdiction before it even moves past go. As soon as you go in there into the court and they're trying to arraign you, and they say, state your name for the record. That's how they get you to say, I am this persona. I am this creature of the federal corporation. I am subject to you. When you state your name, you say, I come before the court having been found to be living, and I'm the sole heir and executor of the res defendant, right? Or res defendant estate, because that's who they actually have in there. The citizen itself is actually the trust. It's the estate, the trust estate, right? Social Security, that's the actual citizen. You are just property of that trust, and that's why they're dealing with you, but they're dealing with you as property, right? So you tell them, I come before the court having been found to be living, right? I'm living. I'm not dead to the law, not mortgaged. I'm living, and I'm the sole heir and executor of the res defendant estate, which means I'm the heir and executor of the property you're trying to administer. And because I'm the executor, you cannot be the administrator, because those are the same position, right? Except an executor is appointed by will, and an administrator is appointed by operation of law, because there is no will. And that's why they presume you to be missing, presumed dead, a decedent, so that there's no will, and they can take the property under administration. The judge can act as a special administrator in his black robe up on his bench with his phallus of Osiris that he likes to bang on the puck all the time. So, all right, now this is interesting. So he says we should not indulge. He says the liberty of considering all cases in an equitable light must not be indulged too far, lest thereby we destroy all law and leave the decision of every question entirely in the breast of the judge. Well, that's where we are today. When they abolished the distinctions between law and equity, that's where we are today, right? And now there is no access to law because you are the trustee of your own estate. I'm trying to see. I have this document, this one right here. I'm glad I can pull it up. Shows you. This is a law review, right? Northwestern Journal of International Law and Business. And it tells you right here, effective 1966, the federal rules of civil procedure were amended to affect the unification of civil and admiralty procedure, which is crazy, bringing the sea inland and making everything international maritime trade. It's pretty wild. Instead of just a conquered Roman territory, which is what Roman civil law is, it's basically taking everyone under administration as conquered chattel. That's what Roman civil law is. So with this amendment, the advisory committee intended that just as the 1938 rules abolished the distinction between actions at law and suits in equity. Those are two entirely different things. You cannot abolish that distinction unless you bar somebody's access to law by taking away their lawful right to property, by taking away access to lawful money, which is why they had to introduce fiat currency, so you cannot buy anything. So you cannot have lawful ownership rights of anything, right? So that's how they were able to abolish the distinction, but they can't abolish common law. They can never abolish common law. So let's go back and see what else Blackstone says about this real quick. And then I'm going to get some of your comments over there in the chat. I see you guys going on in a conversation real quick. Okay, so this is not the right one. It's this one. Okay, so he says, and law without equity, though hard and disagreeable, because that is what law is. It's just cut and dry. Did you violate somebody's free will? Did that person give you their property of their own free will? Has somebody been wronged or injured? It's just black and white. There's no mitigating circumstances. Doesn't matter. You're a cattle thief. Well, I was hungry and I wanted to, I needed something to eat, so I stole it. Doesn't matter. Go to the gallows. Done. That's it. Go to the gallows. Because that's law, and you're taking somebody's livelihood. It's hard and disagreeable. But, as he says, it's much more desirable for the public good than equity without law. which would make every judge a legislator, does that sound familiar, and introduce the most infinite confusion, as there would be almost as many different rules of action laid down in our courts as there are differences of capacity and sentiment in the human mind. That's equity. That's why they wanted to lock you into equity as a trustee. So now we're going to go over here and we're going to check out Bouvier's. So I'm going to show you guys something. Letter D. It's right there on top. Okay, check this out. So we're going to go down to discretion. Now this is Bouvier's 1856 Law Dictionary. It's adapted to the Constitution and laws of the United States. It's primarily a common law dictionary, but it has references to what it says in the title, Roman, civil, and other forms of foreign law, because civil law is foreign to the United States, to the Republic, right? The several states. It's entirely foreign. So, all right, discretion. We're almost there. All right. Just about there. Okay. So discretion, and this says practice. So when you see practice after a definition, it's talking about in law, right? So when it is said that something is left to the discretion of a judge, it signifies that he ought to decide according to the rules of equity. So there's our equity again. And the nature of circumstances, right? Equity is not law, because the judge can't make law. The judge cannot decide law, right? The discretion of a judge is said to be the law of tyrants. It is always unknown. It is different in different men. It is casual and depends upon the constitution, temper, and passion. In the best, it is oftentimes capriciousness. In the worst, it is every vice, folly, and passion to which human nature is liable. That's equity. And now that's all you have. There is no court of law. There is no court of law in this republic whatsoever anymore, because there are no real people in the republic as far as they're concerned, and there's no right to property. You have to have a lawful right to property. Not equitable right determined by a contract or trust arrangement, but you have to have lawful ownership, which you only get by buying with gold and silver. Okay? So when they took away the lawful money, they permanently locked you in a trust indenture, and now they're trying to make it digital so that it can never be undone. That's why they took all the gold, because, and this all goes back to what I'm saying, they cannot make law. They can only regulate commerce and property. So they took all the real money, stashed it away, right? Placed everyone into a trust indenture using fiat currency, and then standardized it across the world and made sure nobody could use lawful money to buy or sell. So you're locked into these courts of equity where the judge is God, right? This is what the bar wants. I think the bar associations, I think the Inns of Court is ran by Satan himself. Has to be. Has to be. Right? All those rumors about the Templars worshiping Baphomet and all that stuff, who knows? Because the bar association, or the Inns of Court, are in the old Templar church, the Round Church in London, and they came up with this system which is incredibly ingenious, and biblically, lawfully, it is the only way you could usurp God's authority. The law, it is. And so what they've done is locked everybody into the position of trustee and chattel as property that can only be adjudicated in equity and in rem as property, and then standardized it, made it universal across the world, and then now they're trying to lock it in with the treasury dividend dollar, that basically creating crypto that uses you as the asset that it derives its value from, and then offering you a dividend as part of that arrangement is just the forerunner to universal basic income as artificial intelligence takes over everything. It's one big trick. And if they get that system set up, we're screwed. We're absolutely screwed. Yeah, so Hold the Line says, no man thought of this system. Right? No man thought of this system. Let's see what Cubby Bear is saying. Let's look at some of these. So Cubby Bear posted a link. Gov Banknotes, WordPress. Unfortunately, I can't copy and paste that from there. If you came up and put it in the private chat, I could copy and paste it. So let's see. Good refresher course tonight, Jeff said. Let's see. Hold the Line says, it didn't quite go down like that for me, but the judge most definitely realized I had him trapped. That's why he reset the case and ultimately dismissed it. That's fantastic. And so it looks like Pat's leaving, right? Yeah. All right. Well, I hope you feel better, man, if you're not feeling good. And yeah, so I think I caught up with primarily what everybody was concerned with. So, okay. Yeah, so that's why I think the Tower of Babel, right, was because we say Babel, like Babylon, blah, 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 Babel, right? Well, that's what this legalese is. It's just Babel. Don't they have an AI called Babel? I know they got an AI called Spellbook for law, right? But I'm not sure about Babel. But anyways, so they reduce people to property via contract and trust arrangements, conquest, and stuff like that. And that's the only way that the government can get any kind of regulatory authority over you, because the government cannot make law. So now, after this presentation, the terms color of law or deprivation of rights under the color of law should make much more sense now, because you can look at the statute or code as just a meaningless pretend clubhouse rule for a fake entity, corporation, whatever. It's just a fake clubhouse rule. Now, if you become part of that entity or corporation, or you become subject to its authority by coming under administration, then that little pretend thing takes on the color of law, and it can be enforced as law against you, because the law is not going to have anything to do with it. It's equity has to, but the law will recognize equity's right to enforce that against you because of the common law of contracts. You agreed to it. You agreed to it. And the whole thing is about, that's why they put in every state constitution and the federal constitution that no state shall pass any law abridging or basically impairing the performance of the obligations of contracts. And it's so important because they intended on usurping your sovereignty the entire time from the very beginning. So some court cases I was looking up earlier that I probably won't run too late tonight, but some court cases I was looking up earlier that I wanted to share with you guys. Hendrick v. State of Maryland. This is, why did it go all the way to the beginning again? Okay, so this case was interesting, but then it said interstate. Let me do something real quick. Control find. I hate when it resets my page when I'm trying to show people stuff. Interstate commerce. Okay, so 25 times. So basically what happened was Maryland, this is shortly after the 14th Amendment was ratified, the United States citizen was created as distinct and separate from the state citizen, right? And Maryland started trying to issue a license or force the residents of the District of Columbia to acquire a license to travel through Maryland. And they said because it's interstate commerce. And the reason I bring this up is because it actually proves that, well, I mean, I can prove a million different ways that the United States citizen is a federal person, that it's only subject to the District of Columbia, Congress, right? But this one, there's some wording that was interesting. So, where is it? Interstate. Okay, at state which furnishes is feasible graduated license. License. Yeah, so the extraction of license and registration fees as conditional to blah, blah, blah. Of course, it would do this when I want to show you guys. Legislation. Okay, let's look at the word. The 14th Amendment was never intended to abridge the power of the state, blah, blah, blah. Order to say. The roads. There it is. Okay. So it says the act constitutes no unlawful discrimination against the residents of the District of Columbia, right? It's proper excise tax. Oh, no, that's not it. That's annoying. Residents of the District of Columbia are classified differently from the residents of the other states except Maryland. This classification is a reasonable one and well-founded ground of jurisdiction of which the court will take judicial notice. And what it says in here somewhere, so it's so annoying that, there we go, right here. All right. Took me long enough. Okay, it says plaintiff in error maintains that the act is void, requiring a license just because he's a United States citizen, as opposed to one of the people of Maryland. That's what he's saying. It's void. It says it discriminates against residents of the District of Columbia, attempts to regulate interstate commerce, and violates the rights of citizens of the United States to pass into and through the state. So that's showing you the citizens of the United States are distinct and separate, and that the licensing only applied to them, the citizens of the United States, to pass through the states, because that's when they started using that whole, oh, we're regulating commerce, it's interstate commerce thing, right? And technically it is. But now everything's interstate commerce because everyone is a foreigner. Unless you're living in the District of Columbia, you're a foreigner in your own state, a resident alien. So yeah, took long enough to find that one, but glad we did. So ex parte nulls. This is interesting. This is from 1854. The power to naturalize, and this has to do with citizenship again. The power to naturalize is made a judicial power by the act of Congress. By act of Congress. Congress cannot confer any judicial power upon a state court. Now, why is that? Because Congress is federal and has nothing to do with the states. The provision of the Constitution of the United States, which gives Congress the power to establish an uniform rule of naturalization, is construed to mean that the rule, when established, shall be executed by the states. That's important. So just because they can create rules of naturalization, citizenship, it's construed to mean that the states are the ones who actually confer it. And that's what Andrew Johnson upheld in 1866 too, when he vetoed the Civil Rights Act. He said, no, this is taking away the state's right to confer citizenship, right? So this is interesting here too. Under the Act of Congress 1802, every court of record in any individual state having common law jurisdiction and a seal and clerk or protonotary shall be considered as a district court within the meaning of the act, meaning they're able to confer citizenship, right? And let's see here, the Supreme Court of the state, blah, blah, blah. So it tells you right here, all other courts of this state being courts of inferior and limited power, although some are courts of record, yet having only statutory and not common law jurisdiction. There you go, statutory, meaning those courts are only for people who have agreed to come under whatever statutes and codes and regulation of property that they had set up, not common law. So people who are independent of that arrangement, that situation, would use common law and not be subject to the statutory jurisdiction. And it tells you they have no power. It takes a common law jurisdiction to grant naturalization, right? Or grant or create citizenship. So it has to happen in common law. So my question is, how does the federal corporation purport to confer any kind of citizenship? The 14th Amendment. See, that's how you know it's 14th Amendment citizenship, because it's a subclass. It's a subclass of citizenship, a creature of the federal corporation. Right. So Maxwell v. Dow. This was, why did I pull this one up? Habeas corpus. Yeah, I hate when it resets like that. I had these all pulled up for a reason. This one's interesting and tells you that the people of the United States, don't have a right to the Bill of Rights, that the Bill of Rights do not apply to the people of the United States, only to the people of the states. That the people of the United States only have the unqualified right to residence within any of the territorial jurisdictions of the United States. So maybe I'll open with those cases next time, so I don't have to sit here and dig through them while you guys are all waiting for me to find it. It's kind of boring. So, but I did have it up, and they do say it, and I can prove it. So whatever. But all right, was there anything else I wanted to go through tonight? This is interesting. Did we find the one where he's talking about the ward that shows you that it's administration? You got Mr. Obvious. Mr. Obvious. See ya. No. See, is it over here? Holy crap, it's slow. So this document right here is called the it's a WordPress escapee blog, right? Whatever. That's just somebody put on the internet. Except for I can prove that words directly out of this occur in the Michigan statutes, and I have proved it on prior shows. Right here, where it says that no one was allowed to move from town to town without the appropriate settlement certificate. That's what your birth certificate ends up being, right? All of this Roman civil law of creating titles to chattel and issuing certificates of permission to do things or showing interest in stuff. It's all Roman civil law. It's all regulation of property, and it's incorrectly called law. So where was it? So what happened was, this is one of the main right here. So beginning from 1871, further historic changes in the administration of vital statistics such as birth certificates and death certificates with the introduction of health districts and sanitary districts, the Local Government Act of 1871, Public Health Act of 1872, and see, all this happened right after the 14th Amendment to start setting up the system of administration. Sanitary authority responsible for various public health matters, including health legally known as sanity. Two types of sanitary districts were created, being urban and rural, while the sanitary districts were abolished in 1894. So they started introducing, so it went like this. So basically, prior to the 14th Amendment, all births were recorded in the family Bible, and that was admissible at common law. Nobody needed to know who you were, what your name is, none of that stuff, because you lived in the private, unless you chose to tell them what your name was, right? And then you had the Civil Rights Act of 1866 was introduced, and that created a federal citizen, which they enshrined with the 14th Amendment. Andrew Johnson vetoed it and said, hey, you've taken away the state's right to confer citizenship. The federal government doesn't have its own citizens. Well, right around that same time, states like Michigan started introducing the Birth Registration Act, right, where they now had the county clerk start to record births on the record or register births on the record. And this was so they could silently funnel people into the 14th Amendment citizenship, right, without them knowing. And then right after that, in like 1878 or 1879, they started allowing people to vote directly for the president. Which, how could you do that if the federal corporation is a foreign corporation to the states? How could any one of we, the people, vote directly for the president, CEO of a foreign corporation? We could not, and we did not. We voted for electors who then went and voted federally on behalf of us, right? But we did not vote directly for the president. Once they started registering people to vote directly for the president, that was another contractual nexus to pull you into 14th Amendment citizenship, right? And what the birth certificate has now become, since they've taken away all your lawful money, is exactly what it was originally created for in England, which is a pauper settlement certificate. Okay. And it tells you, where you're allowed to live and work. It is what it originally was. Now it operates as a settlement certificate, a warehouse receipt, and as a title to your estate. And you can go anywhere you want in the United States. So I'm in Michigan. I had a Michigan birth certificate, but that doesn't mean I'm stuck in Michigan, because what they've done is they've turned the whole nation into a corporate tax plantation. This is all one big pauper workhouse, right? And the privilege of being able to use Federal Reserve notes and be able to work for these corporations that have been set up under this commercial security scheme is considered a benefit that they can tax your income for, tax your labor. It's a benefit. Right? The benefit of using Federal Reserve notes, the benefit of being allowed to be collateral, to be chattel property of the corporate state, used as collateral, having all your property regulated. And the Social Security number, right, identifies you as federal personnel, essentially, as the Social Security is a trust itself. That's what you're actually the trustee of. That is the core nexus of the citizenship now after the bankruptcy, because all your real property is tied to it, right? All your real property is tied to it. Your real estate, your automobile, all your real and personal property, like your automobile attached to it through your driver's license and registration, your real estate's attached to it, and everything that they want to be able to tax and generate revenue from is tied to that Social Security number. And that Social Security number is considered a benefit. the ability to be employed, right? So let's take a look at some of these words. The word to apply. Apply, plea is to beg. Apply is to beg. That's what that means. Employment is a scheme. It's a ploy, right? It's a scam. So you're begging to be part of a scam when you apply for employment. That's what you're actually doing. You're begging to be part of a scam, and you're partaking in this commercial scheme that's unconstitutional and existing outside the Constitution as sort of a parallel unregistered trust is what it is. We were reading about it earlier in the Jurist Society. It's a banking association, right? That whole aspect of that book is very fascinating. It's pull it up real quick. Wherever it was. Here. Okay. So this whole aspect of this is very, very interesting. So it tells you this is what we're going through in the Jurist Society, because many of us have already claimed our estates, and now we're going to put our property in private express trusts, which are protected by Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution. It's who the Rockefellers or what the Rockefellers used to protect their property. The Rothschilds, and it's what they continue to use to this day to keep their property out of the public domain and away from the hands of taxation. So says that when a trustee is engaging in trade or commerce on behalf of the trust, acting under the general common law, the trust is within the jurisdiction over which the literal, absolute, and absolute protections of the Bill of Rights extend, because it's a private contract, so it puts you into common law immediately. Even though trust can only be adjudicated in equity, because Article 1, Section 10 prohibits any state from passing any laws that impair the obligations of contract, and your common law right to contract comes before anything the government does, then the private express trust, and don't take my word for it, this is how the Rockefellers and all these wealthy oligarchs protected their properties, because it works. They designed this. This is a loophole in their system they designed specifically to keep themselves from being subject to the commercial system, and it's the private express trust. And so for instance, if you take your automobile and you do a declaration of trust and you put your automobile in the trust, and the instrument, the trust instrument, the declaration says that this property is not to be used for commercial purposes whatsoever under any circumstances, then for the cop to compel you under threat of force to register that automobile as a commercial, because vehicles are commercial, and to put commercial advertising on it is actually against the law for him to do, and you could sue the hell out of him. That actually is a deprivation of rights under the color of law, because you're trying to force me to impair my obligation in this contract, my common law right to contract in this private contract, and you're trying to get me to violate this common law contract. That's like one of the most sacred and egregious violations of law that anybody can do in the Republic, and even the oligarchs uphold that because it protects them as well. That's how powerful this is. And it says that and he has no direct contact with the federal government. Under the right of contract law protected by the federal Constitution, the trustee may enter into the 14th Amendment jurisdiction via contract, i.e. by willfully availing the trust of benefits like the quasi-corporate privilege franchise of limited liability for the discharge of debts using Federal Reserve notes. So that shows you, just by the very act of using Federal Reserve notes as laid out in HJR 192, just the very act of using Federal Reserve notes is taking advantage of a limited liability quasi-corporate benefit that they can use to presume your tacit agreement to be part of the commercial scheme. So if you do create a private express trust and you do not join the Jurist Society to learn how to do all this stuff and claim your estate and everything, then just make sure you don't use Federal Reserve notes, because it's going to render what you're doing ineffective. And he goes on to explain it pretty well, but quite simply because the Federal Reserve notes, obviously, as most of you know, because I say it all the time, represent a mortgage on your estate. And so what that means is the only thing that gives the Federal Reserve note value is the fact that your sweat equity and productive value is guaranteed to the investor, to the lender. And they also have the beneficial use of your estate while the loan is outstanding. That's part of the ancient law of mortgages. That just goes. They didn't have to write that. That just is how it is. Like much of the law is. That's what confuses people so much. They think that all this stuff has to be created like now in contemporary times for them to do it. And no, all of this law, including common law, is ancient. And they can just do these things without having to write down that that's what they're allowed to do, because among people who know the law, the law of mortgage dictates that while the loan is outstanding, whatever property is held in trust as collateral, the lender gets the rents and profits of that property. Well, that's what revenue code is. That's what the motor vehicle code is. That's what property tax is. That's what all that stuff is it's the beneficial use. It's the rents and the profits of the property that's being held in trust as collateral while the loan's outstanding. And so the bankers, the Federal Reserve and the international banking cartel control what's called the corporation company, which is what controls in every state all of these banks pretending to be courts, these district court systems. And then they hire their Gestapo pirates to come and fleece you, right? And that's how they get their rents and profits while the loan's outstanding. Is to tell you can only drive this property because you only have the right to use it. You can only travel on this property a maximum of 55 miles an hour on this road. And if you do not use this property the way that the administration is telling you to, then we will put you in a state of peril by flipping on our red and blue pirate lights. We will pull you over and we will create an attachment to your estate and render you responsible for the performance of new obligations, whether it be pay a ticket or seize your property or, distrain you in exchange for some fine or fee, and et cetera, et cetera. So, all right. When the trustee is engaging in trade or commerce on behalf of the trust, blah, blah, blah. Right. So, seeing down here, it tells you one such quote is that of John D. Rockefeller is reported to have said, "The key to true wealth and power is to own nothing and control everything." Right? And that's the idea behind this private express trust. But the reason I'm bringing this up is what he says about this implied trust that's essentially created, right? It's not trust, it's an association. But really all these various corporate bodies, however you want to look, and I say corporate as a term as in non-living, all these corporate bodies are just varying forms of trust, whether they be associations, corporations, or just an express trust, a set decay trust, which can also be an express trust, or whatever the case may be. They're all just various forms of non-living legal fiction entities that are primarily created for the purpose of committing fraud, and they always have been, right? A Practical Treatise on the Law of Trusts. I love this book. I wonder if I have it up. Let me see if I have it up somewhere. Yep, I do. Look at this. It's fantastic because check this out. So this is from like 1899 or something, but he says the origin of trusts, or rather the adaptation of them to the English law, may be traced to the ingenuity of fraud. By the interposition of a trustee, the debtor thought to withdraw his property out of the reach of his creditor, right? So by placing the property in trust as basically like a legal person standing between A and C, right? Keeping A from getting C's property because it's held by B. Is basically creating a fiction, but the law, or not the law, but the law, the equity looks at it as if it's real. We can't call it the law. Roman civil law, but still that's not law. It's just another form of equity. So the freeholder to intercept the fruits of tenure from the lord of whom the lands were held, and the body ecclesiastic to evade restrictions directed against the growing wealth of the church by the statutes of mortmain. That's what I was telling you guys earlier. And now, so he tells you about the writ of subpoena, which is now a summon, right? A summons, because subpoenas were for people who still had some lawful rights of property, weren't absolutely dead to the law. He tells you that, so I'm going to have to translate this for you because it's written in an old English kind of way. So as I read it, don't let me lose you because I'll translate it into what it means. It says, originally, the only pledge for the due execution of the trust was faith and integrity of the trustee. But the mere feeling of honor proving, as was likely, when opposed to self-interest and extremely precarious security, John Waltham, Bishop of Salisbury, a chancellor in the reign of Richard II, originated the writ of subpoena, right? So what that means is originally when trusts were first created, the only pledge for the due execution of the trust, and there's that word pledge, right, which is part of the ancient system of pledging, which is what trusts are a part of. When something's mortgaged, it automatically creates a trust, okay? And this is the Satanic inversion of law. It's a cult of death, the dead pledge, the Satanic inversion of law used to allow man and probably demons to usurp the authority of God to make law by placing people in trust through mortgage or through some form of trust indenture, right? So, and he's saying, so the pledge for the due execution of the trust was faith and integrity of the trustee. And he says, but the feeling of honor proving, as was likely when opposed to self-interest, extremely precarious security, saying that when you're opposed, when the trustee is opposed to his own self-interest, his honor is not likely to keep him from violating his obligations to the trust, right? If he has a chance to make a little bit of money or steal some. So he says he created the subpoena, the writ of subpoena, by which the trustee was liable to be summoned into chancery. So you see how this works: subpoenas, summons, this is all equity chancery stuff, right? Chancery and equity are almost completely interchangeable, but they are different. And I'll explain that in another, I mean, I could explain it real quick, but I'll probably lose a lot of you guys because it'll be boring. But basically, a chancellor was created to deal with equitable issues, and so he was said to have, since the king was the only person capable of making equitable decisions in the realm, meaning deciding up to his conscience what's right or wrong, then the chancellor, which was a priest, convinced the king to let him hold his conscience in trust and act on his behalf, since the king was so busy. And then the courts of chancery were created. So, but anyways, summoned into chancery and compellable to answer upon his oath the allegations of his septicate trust, right? So that is what a subpoena and summons for, is to compel a trustee to answer the allegations of the septicate trust and whether or not he breached or violated those. And that is what's happening every single time you are summoned into one of these courts of equity. These banks pretending to be a court, they're trying to compel you to answer for your breach of trust. They don't care about your right to travel. They don't care about none of that stuff. They presume you to be the trustee of a decedent estate using property that is under administration, and you have to use it the way that the trust indenture specifies, which means all the statutes, rules, codes, and all that shit regarding the use of property. Otherwise, they're going to fine and fee you. They're going to punish you, right, for breach of fraud. And so it's interesting, the last thing he says, and I'm going to go back to the other thing. Thus, in the words of an old counselor, the parents of the trust were fraud and fear, and the court of conscience was the nurse. Court of conscience is the court of equity, not a court of law. And that's the whole point. It's because it's not dealing with factual stuff. So, all right. We were, where was I? Damn it. My bad, guys. It is Weiss. There it is. Okay. Got it. All right. So now this is interesting. He says that under the jurisdiction of the 14th Amendment, the federal government has full and direct contact with the trust as they see fit for the benefit of public policy regulations known as codes and statutes of this jurisdiction. So that's if you use Federal Reserve notes as a trustee of your private express trust, you completely negate the point of creating it, because who is the debtor that's actually named on the promissory note that we use as currency? Who's the debtor on that contract? Well, it's the United States. So when you start using the United States commercial paper, of which it is the debtor that's securing the obligations of the contract and gives it its value, then you automatically allow them to act as an intervener in the affairs of the trust by operation of law. But that probably confuses a lot of you guys, because in the public streams, we don't really talk a whole lot about the private express trust. It's something we do in the Jurist Society. But this right here, the resulting nexus or confederacy developed under House Joint Resolution 192, is an affiliation better known as an association. This is interesting. And the common enterprise of this unincorporated society is to offer all Americans a so-called privilege in the form of what is better known as a quasi-contract to participate in commerce without the payments of debt for Social Security purposes, which is unconstitutional. But what's interesting is just by getting people to participate in this commercial scheme, right, they didn't actually have to write down the association. Let's just call it a trust for simplicity's sake. They didn't have to write down this new public charitable trust in situation that they created. Instead, it was implied and automatically became a common enterprise and an unincorporated society by everybody acting in unison to use negotiable instruments as currency, despite the Constitution, despite the fact that it's unconstitutional. And so what was created was this association that exists outside of and parallel to our original constitutional republic. And it pretends to be the actual government, but it's an unincorporated association of Confederates doing something unlawful. Moreover, this unincorporated society is, well, like he says, outside the literal common law principle that demands the payment of debts. That's common law because you buy and sell and pay your debts, and it's black and white, cut and dry, as stated in Article 1, Section 10, but is allowed, upheld, and protected by Article 1, Section 10 that upholds the obligations of contracts. So by the collective use of the public of the Federal Reserve notes, it became an implied contract and an implied trust or association that was created as a body politic without them having to write anything down that can be upheld by Article 1, Section 10 under the Obligation of Contracts Clause. That's pretty mind-blowing. And this is the type of ancient unwritten law type of stuff that they're able to do, right? So and they don't have to write it down because they know the law. Once upon a time, your ancestors knew the law and was able to protect against things like this because they studied Blackstone's commentaries, they studied John Locke, they studied law in general, the history of law going all the way back to ancient, and they knew what these operations were, just like the natural operation of dependency causing you to be placed in trust, and the law of mortgage automatically giving the lender beneficial use of the property, or not use, but entitled to the rents and profits of the property, actually. So what he says is this amounts to a federated, unincorporated society, just like I was saying, by operation of law, which means it wasn't written down and consented to by contract. It's just by the operation of what they were doing, by the operation of law, and the fact that everybody participated. It made something that was contractually protected by the Constitution in the same way the express trust and trustees are, right? So I had one of our fellow jurists, he emailed me earlier and he told me about this case after we had got done with our Jurist Society meeting. And he said, this case says, sorry guys, right here. Okay, so James Harvey, I got your email, and he says, he showed me this case that says, that tries to say that, so sovereign citizens, or somebody claiming to be a sovereign citizen, went in and tried to argue their sovereignty in court, and that's asinine. And I wanted to point this out, and James agrees. Like, obviously, first of all, they're saying that you cannot, said that flesh, let's see here, these theories should be rejected. So, saying that you cannot opt out of U.S. maritime or any federal law, right? That you cannot choose to not participate in their jurisdiction. That's absolute horseshit. And I'll tell you why right off the bat. Because they have to acquire jurisdiction in the first place to even move forward. That's what arraignment is. Arraignment is the acquisition of jurisdiction to be able to move forward with the case. That's why they have to have you come in, state your name for the record, and all that stuff. Now, if jurisdiction was automatically granted, there would be no arraignment. They wouldn't have to do that. They would not have to come and get your consent, whether you realize that's what you're doing or not, to be in their jurisdiction. And their in rem jurisdiction as chattel property. You wouldn't have to do that. And that's essentially what maritime admiralty deals with, is property, cargo. stuff like that, right? So, with that being said, these bar association, another principle of law is if you're arguing with them in court or you're trying to plead your case in a court of equity, that's impossible because of all the things I've listed about equity throughout this whole stream. If you're just now joining, please go back and watch because I lay out the difference between law and equity. Equity is not law, okay? In equity, the judge is God, and the judge can say and do whatever he wants or whatever he feels is equitable. Again, we have it right here. The discretion of a judge is said to be the law of tyrants, and discretion is the judge deciding according to the rules of equity. And now trusts can only be adjudicated in equity. So when you go in there, you're summoned in there on a traffic ticket or whatever it might be, what you're being brought in there for is a breach of trust. And that necessarily has to be a court of equity, right? So you could ask the judge, hey, this is one of the ways you challenge jurisdiction at arraignment. You do not let them move past go. You say, hey, judge, is this a court of law or equity? And when you truly understand the difference between law and equity, that is a damning question. Because if you say, well, this is a court of law, and you say, oh, really? Okay, where's the victim? Because law, I must have injured a living, one of we the people, right? I must have injured somebody. So where's the signed sworn affidavit with the witnesses and the victim? Where are they at? Well, you didn't register your plate. Oh, okay, so this is a court of equity. So you presume me to be in a trust arrangement and a trust relationship with my property. Is that the case? Right? So it has to be. It can only be those two things. It cannot be anything else, especially in this country, right? It cannot be anything else other than those two things. And of course it's equity. So that's why the judge can sit up there and say, oh, I don't care. You're not sovereign. You're subject to our jurisdiction. Because if you're arguing at that point with him and you're in the actual case now and you're trying to lay out your case as you're not property, you're actually a living man or woman, and you're trying to lay out that case in a trial, you're already property. You already conceded to being property at the arraignment. If you've gotten to the trial, you've lost. You've lost. You're never going to win. Court of equity, it tells you right here, court of equity, right? The discretion of the judge is said to be the law of tyrants. It's always unknown. It is different in different men. It is casual and depends on the constitution, temper, and passion. And the best is oftentimes capriciousness, and the worst, it is every vice, folly, and passion to which human nature is liable, right? And Blackstone, again, I cannot drive this home enough. That's why when anybody wants to argue with me about law, right, I say first, before we have any discussion about law, you need to tell me the difference between law and equity, because there are no courts of law, right? And that's what Blackstone says. Blackstone's commentaries from the 1700s, he says, on the other hand, the liberty of considering all cases in an equitable light must not be indulged too far, lest we thereby destroy all law, because equity is not law. It's almost the opposite. It only deals with fictional and implied things. And leave the discretion or the decision of every question entirely in the breast of a judge. Just like Bouvier said. And law without equity, though hard and disagreeable, because man does not make law, law is in operation whether you like it or not, and it's black and white. Did you injure somebody or did you violate your oath or obligation to something? That's law. If you do either of those things, then you've broken the law. And because of that, judges or people preferred equity because equity was more merciful. You could appeal to, say you were a cattle thief and you got caught and taken to a court of law, you're getting hung. Right? No matter what, doesn't matter if you were starving, if you had starving kids and you were trying to feed your family and so you made a bad decision, you stole from somebody, it doesn't matter. Law is going to hang you. Done. Right? Equity, you could appeal to the judge and tell him the mitigating circumstances. And then it's all up to him and his conscience of how, if and how you should be punished. Right? But it's not law, because the law would deal with it in one way. That's it. Black and white. So he says, and law without equity, though hard and disagreeable, is much more desirable for the public good than equity without law, which would make every judge a legislator, exactly what we have going on, and introduce most infinite confusion, as there would then be almost as many different rules of action laid down in the courts as there are differences of capacity and sentiment in the human mind. And look at how much time he spends explaining this, right? And eloquently putting this, just for several hundred years later for these assholes, right, to do this. Just as the 1938 rules abolished the distinction between actions at law and suits in equity. Well, yeah, that was after the bankruptcy. See, it was after they mortgaged your estate to back the public debt and create Federal Reserve notes, and that mortgage, by operation of the law of mortgages, automatically placed you in a trust indenture as trustee of your own property being held in trust as collateral for the public debt, of which the lender is entitled to the rents and profits of. Right here, it says this: the lender is entitled not only to payments of interest on the debt, but also to the rents and profits of the real estate. This meant, as far as the borrower is concerned, the real estate was of no value, that is, dead, until the debt was paid in full. Hence the Norman English name mort, dead, gage, pledge. So while the loan is outstanding, your property is held in trust. They abolished the distinction between law and equity so they could enforce the interests of the lender more effectively against you, so that you cannot question the indenture if you ever get wise to it, because you have no access to law, right? And so that they can enforce compliance to the indenture for their institutional investors who are buying up all the commercial paper they're generating from taking you to court. Your bonds, your traffic tickets, your coupons for court fines, all these things are instruments. They're commercial paper. They're currency. So essentially what the bank or what the court is a bank generating unregistered securities, creating its own commercial paper, using you as security, because they're part of the institutional investor class. These are all private for-profit courts, right, that have institutional investors, private owners, and they are cashing in on their investment by fleecing you and controlling your behavior on a daily basis, by regulating your property. Because again, back to the original point of this, man cannot make law. They can only regulate commerce and whatever property happens to come under their administration, right? Whether it be through some sort of defect of the mind, you're mentally incompetent, and so the state has to take care of you. You're poor, so the state has to take care of you. You're not of age, so the state is duty bound to take care of you and maintain the property until you come of age, right? All of these things place you under administration. Then man can make rules regarding your use of your property and behavior. But those still are not law. And they only take the color of law when you're in that administrative position, when you're under that administrative situation, right? So only time it takes color of law. Otherwise, you try to tell me how to use my property, and I tell you my property is not under administration. This estate's been claimed, right? The prodigal son has returned and claimed his property, okay? And that's on the record. And so, is this a court of law or a court of equity? If it's a court of law, where's my victim? Because that's law. That's what Blackstone tells you, law. That's law. That's when they differentiate between law and equity in Article 3, Section 2, right here. There is only one law, and then everything else is equity. The law is common law. That is it. That is it. Right? But in order for this foreign corporation here, registered with the City of London, as a commercial extension of the City of London, right, called the Government of the United States, which is notified on the 3rd of July, 1776, and stays updated each year. For this thing to acquire jurisdiction over you, must be in rem as property under international maritime law or admiralty law. That's why they also, in that document that I pulled up just a moment ago, this one, they tell you that the federal rules of civil procedure were amended to effect the unification of civil and admiralty procedure. Okay, so they put civil and admiralty together, right, to make it basically the international regulation of chattel, permanently cementing it under the control of the federal corporation, which is a foreign international entity, right? And that's important to know and know how to explain and to firmly understand why that is the case. Where did I pull up Black's Law 4th edition for here? It's still 14th Amendment. Yeah, we don't need that one. Save some tabs. So I feel like, okay, this one. So this is how they got the the states, the several states of the Union in on it, right? It's called the Buck Act. And the Buck Act, and this was written by a guy who just basically compiled all the information you can go find independently. I have shown a lot of this, and I can prove all of it. He knows exactly what he's talking about, but it's compiled in one place here for the sake of simplicity. So if anybody wants to challenge it or thinks that it cannot be proven, I would be more than happy to make you look stupid. But I highly doubt that my subscribers would even attempt it, because you guys know that I prove everything I say. So unless I tell you it's a theory. So a map of the United States of America includes the 50 sovereign and independent states who are freely associated together in a union. It does not include the District of Columbia, which was created by the Constitution of the Union as the legal home of the federal government. That government was intended to be a servant to the Union states, not their master. That's important. Just like I said, the people created the states. So the creator is always above the created, same way God is above you. And that's Blackstone, he tells you. So the people created the states. The states got together and created a feudal trust called the federal government. Federal means feudal. Feudal government that was supposed to be caged in like a beast into the 10 square miles of the District of Columbia with boundary stones, where one side it tells you jurisdiction of the United States, and on the other side it tells you you're going back into common law jurisdiction in Maryland, right? So that's pretty important to understand. We had it caged in, just like he's saying here. So it's intended to be the servant. In order for the federal government to tax a citizen of one of the several states, they had to create a contractual nexus. This contractual nexus is called Social Security. The federal government always does everything according to principles of laws. That's what I tell you guys. It's not, so people go, oh, they don't care about the law. They do whatever they want. Well, actually, to a degree, of course, they do. There's corruption, but they have to follow the essential principles of law, and they do so. And they do so in their favor, because they make sure only they know it and you do not, so that they can do things that are not written down because they're just ancient principles of law that everybody who knows the law should know. They're able to do these things, like take you under administration through presumption, without telling you, because that body of law is 1,000 years old almost. And they don't have to tell you about it. It's been an established principle all throughout Western common law. So whatever. All right. So in 1935, the federal government instituted Social Security. The Social Security Board then created 10 Social Security districts, creating a federal area. That's right. That's a jurisdictional overlay, like a clear sheet of glass, which covered the several states like an overlay. Yeah. In 1939, the federal government instituted the Public Salary Tax Act in 1939. Guess what your Social Security number makes you? Federal personnel. It's considered technically a deferred retirement benefit, right? You don't think it's odd at all that you're offered a retirement by the federal corporation, that you're just automatically, you get what essentially amounts to a pension from the federal corporation? Well, that's because you work for it, whether you know it or not, right? Which is municipal law of the District of Columbia, taxing all federal and state government employees who live and work in any federal area. That's what the Buck Act does, too. Also, it expands what the federal area is. Now, everything is a federal area, if you agree to it, right? Because we have, where was this? The definition of resident from the Motor Vehicle Code. Resident means every person who resides in this state and establishes that he or she is legally present in the United States. Why does it say legally present? Because you cannot be physically present in the United States. And you can only establish legal presence by contract. That's what establish means, right? So you establish that legal presence via contract. And it tells you this right in the definition of resident, because resident means resident alien. Resident is a foreigner. That's why you never hear your governor say Michigan citizens, Virginia citizens, Florida citizens. No, they say residents, because though you reside in this state as a foreigner, you are legally present in the United States, which is foreign to the several states, no matter what. And I can prove that ad infinitum. So now the government knows it cannot tax those citizens who live and work outside the territorial jurisdiction of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, or Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, which that Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 allows Congress to make whatever rules necessary for the property that they have within the states. Well, guess what 14th Amendment citizens are? Chattel property of Congress. And so they use Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 to basically make all their code regarding the infants within the state, the chattel property under administration. So, and then obviously Article 1, Section 8 dictates the uniform laws of bankruptcy, their commerce clause, and their ability to erect Article 1 courts and all that good stuff. So, and that's how they do. See, they take the Constitution was so vague in this respect that because they had such a good grasp of the law, they knew that all of these were backdoors to use principles of law to usurp the sovereignty of the people. And that's why the people were against the Constitution. The Constitution is an infernal document. It is, Thomas Jefferson said, the germ of dissolution is seated within this infernal document. It says the judicial branch of government will work like gravity by night and by day to usurp the sovereignty of the states, and that is exactly what has happened. So, in Section 110E, this act allowed any department of the federal government to create a federal area for the imposition of the Public Tax Act of 1939. The imposition of this tax act is at 4 USCS Section 111, and the rest of the taxing laws in Title 26, the Internal Revenue Code. Social Security Board had already created an overlay of a federal area. So, as a result, the federal government created the federal states, which are exactly like the sovereign states. Exactly. That's exactly true. So all the states via the 14th Amendment, the Public Salary Tax Act, and the Buck Act, among others, obviously the Lieber Code instituting martial law and never lifting it. It's never lifted, still in operation. In fact, I think the U.S. Code is just an extension of the Lieber Code. Because before that, it wasn't called code. It was called Revised Statutes of the United States. But then they scrapped that and got U.S. Code. So I'm fairly certain it's just the Lieber Code mixed with the Revised Statutes of the United States. But either way, that military territorial jurisdiction is still in effect. So when you read the Lieber Code, it had to either be lifted by an act of the legislature or a proclamation of the president. And neither of those two things happened. I think it was an act. I know a proclamation was one of them. And neither of those two things happened. They never lifted the wartime situation. So that was the very first avenue of jurisdictional overlay. And then you had the zone improvement program, created the zip codes and all the reconstruction BS that they did. And the Social Security zone. Well, before the Social Security, you had you had land bank districts, because the definition of land is the people of a nation, and the definition of farm. So they passed the Federal Farm Loan Act. The definition of farm is a taxable district leased for collection of revenue, and they divided into 12 districts that are farms, and then they created 12 land banks, and then those land banks usurped all the land in each of those districts, because that was the very first step to taking away the sovereignty of the people, right? Because again, the law that you're under is determined by your relationship to your estate, without question. All right, do you have absolute ownership and control of property, right? And especially of yourself and your ability to acquire property, or have you been mortgaged as an indentured servant? Now any property that you acquire automatically is presumed to be held in trust as collateral for the public debt of a bunch of scumbag PDF files in Congress. Right? All right. So the federal government created federal states, which are exactly like the sovereign states and occupy the same territories and boundaries, but whose names are capitalized versions of the sovereign states. Remember that proper names and proper nouns in English only have the first letter capitalized. Exactly. For example, federal state of Illinois. Now, see, people say this is a conspiracy theory, but this is in the Styles Manual, and what it is it's symbol. It's a symbol when they do this, right? It becomes a symbol. It becomes basically like art. It's a copy hold, right? And so it's made to look and sound like your actual name, but that entity is not you, and it actually denotes a civilly dead entity, like how tombstones are written in all caps and stuff like that, denotes a civilly dead entity. So say what you want about the caps, right? But I can prove that the United States citizen is a civilly dead entity because you've been mortgaged, and it says right in the definition of mortgage, and I can show where you've been mortgaged. And so as far as the law is concerned and the judge in the courtroom, you are just property. You're not a living man or woman with free will subject to common law. You are property subject to a trust indenture. That is it. All right, so Illinois is overlaid on the sovereign state of Illinois. Further, it is designated by the federal abbreviation of IL. That's absolutely a fact. And how are you getting all of these frickin' documents that I have and able to put them out as quickly as I'm showing them? That's pretty impressive, Chicago. It's pretty impressive. So, yeah, nice. Okay. Appreciate it. Yeah, I really should start linking a lot of these documents in the description of the videos. But man, as you guys see, I have like, I don't even know how many tabs open here. I don't think I'd have enough room to link all these. So I just kind of bank on people going back, watching the stream, be like, all right, what did he show here? Because this is what I've done. Be like, okay, where did he get that? All right, and then I go verify. I look it up. I find the source documents and I read them until I understand them. And that's kind of what I hope all of you do as well. But I do appreciate that, Cubby. Thank you. So, all right, let's see, where were we? So yeah, so IL instead of the sovereign state abbreviation, ILL. That's true. That's in the Styles Manual as well, along with the nationalities that show you that the list of nationalities, Michiganian, I actually have that one, Michiganian, Alabaman, Virginian, New Yorker, those are your actual nationalities, not United States citizen. That's a foreigner, and that's an enfranchisement of a bankrupt corporation. It's public chattel. So AZ instead of the abbreviation ARIZ, if you use a two-letter capitalized abbreviation, you are declaring the location is under the jurisdiction of the federal government instead of the powers of the sovereign state. Well, that would be one of the ways that you establish, right, via some sort of contractual nexus, and the zip code, the zone improvement program, or the abbreviations are one way to establish that you are legally present in the United States. So even though you're residing in this state, you are corresponding from and signing from and declaring yourself to be from the federal territory existing as an overlay on this state. Now, interesting thing about that is Article 4, Section Section 2 or Section 3? No, Article 4, Section 3. The one we were showing earlier, it says, so this is like the double-edged sword that allows the private express trust. Because it says right here, it says new states may be admitted by Congress into the Union, but no new states shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state. And that's why it has to all be done by contract, because they can't actually set up their jurisdiction within the state. All they can do is create a contractual nexus to allow you to contract into a federal overlay, but that contract is required. And that's what technically keeps them from violating Section 3 of Article 4. It's because they didn't erect a jurisdiction of the District of Columbia, which is a foreign state, within any of the states. Instead, they just have a net laid over top of it that you can get caught in via contract. That's how they do it. And then Congress shall have the power to dispose and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States. And that's actually how Congress reaches out of the District of Columbia and still affects your life, even though they're technically foreign if you're one of we the people. But as a 14th Amendment citizen, you're chattel property. So they can do that constitutionally. And see, they had the forethought the entire time. All of that stuff was put in there with the intention of setting this exact system up right now. They've been planning this for so long. It almost makes me wonder if they knew about AI way back. But I mean, that'd be kind of crazy, right? But it's like, how else did they plan on making the system permanent? Or is there some non-human entities that are actually coming up with this ingenious plan of inverting God's system and trapping everybody in a digital prison of equity? I mean, could men think of this? I mean, men like me and men and women, like you guys, you see this stuff, so we're capable of seeing it, but would we have ever been able to think of it, And it requires so much learning and understanding of ancient concepts that pre-exist. I bet you a lot of judges And lawyers do not even know the stuff we talk about on this channel because they don't use it in their everyday life and their practice, right? They only use the commercial equity stuff, and they don't know about the principles of mortgage. And I often wonder, right? So I don't know. But anyway, so we got AB Normal. I like that name. Good to see you, man. I don't know if I've seen you and said hi yet. Sketches. Good to see you. See Mr. Obvious. Grouch says I've seen old wills on people, and I've seen people labels as type P. Pauper in the passport is type P. That's what they say. I mean, that is how they used to identify the paupers under administration, was they would have a letter P, but I don't know. I wouldn't go so far. I've never found any actual evidence that is why that's on the passport, but it wouldn't surprise me. So as a result of these shadow states, the federal government assumes that every area is a federal area and that the citizens therein are federal citizens. It's true. So that's the basic gist of this. I'll link this in the chat so you guys can take a look at this at your leisure. There you go. Yeah, look at this. This is the whole thing too. And they say, so you could print this out and keep this with you. I don't know if I've told you guys to print it out, but this right here, this is UCC Article 9-307 or Title 9-307. Do they call UCC articles, or I don't know. I don't play in their sandbox so much, but whatever. We can just say Section 9. Yeah, it says section. Okay, so UCC Section 9-307, location of debtor. And you go down to H, and it tells you location of the United States. The United States is located in the District of Columbia. Well, all these court cases and everything, they uphold that the United States is foreign, just like the one Hendrick v. Maryland situation where they're trying to issue licensing requirements on United States citizens just to travel through Maryland because they're foreign and it's considered interstate commerce. And this has been upheld repeatedly, right? But here they just blatantly tell you the United States is located in the District of Columbia. So when you get pulled over and the cop says, he said, Chris Henneman said, Roth's 25-point plan for world domination in full effect. And AB Normal said he's been here just listening as usual. That's cool. We are doing well. Well, I'm doing well this evening. I can't speak for the entire audience, but hope you're doing well also. But this is something you can show the cops, right? Location of the United States. So you presume me to be a United States citizen. So that would make me a resident of the state, correct? Well, what, are you not a resident of the state? No, I'm not. Then what are you? I'm one of the people, the state of Michigan. Well, how does that make you not a United? Because the United States citizen was created by the 14th Amendment. Boom, you show them Black's Law, and you go, the United States is foreign to the several states, and then boom, show them UCC Section 9, right, -307. Location of the United States. The United States is located in the District of Columbia, right? You presume me to be the public chattel of Congress, used as collateral for the public debt, with all my property held in trust and under administration, subject to administrative regulation, which is what you're trying to enforce. But I'm here to tell you that's not the case, right? I'm one of we the people of the state of Michigan. I come before the government or the court you're working for, right? And I am subject only to the common law of property, right? This property is not under administration, and so long as I don't use it to harm anyone, there's nothing you can do with it, and you have no right to distrain me of it. And to distrain is a common law term. Distrain is when you take somebody's property and hold it as basically like a ransom for a debt. And that's what they do when they seize your car. Is basically they you don't want to convey the right of your property to the state to be used as collateral, because that's what you do when you register. You're giving it to the state to be part of the trust and be held as collateral and to be used to generate revenue. And so, you don't want to give us the right of your property to be used as collateral, then we're going to distrain you of your property, and you're going to have to pay to get it out, and you're going to have to, register it with us. And it's like, dude, fuck, you're a criminal. You are an absolute pirate criminal. And I can prove it, because that objectively is what they're doing to you. And when you think about it like that, it really makes you want to just do 1776 all over again. You know what I mean? Because that's honestly what these people deserve. Every last single one of them, Republican or Democrat, does not matter at all. They are all one big scumbag clan of parasitical pirates who have basically brought piracy inland and are now engaging in inland piracy, fleecing you and using your children as chattel property, and acting as if they're property of the state, that the state can dictate what goes into their bodies and what they have to know and what they're not allowed to know, what's harmful knowledge and all this. This shit is wild. And so if there ever was a time where what Thomas Jefferson said held true, it would be now. And what he said was the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants alike. And let me tell you something, way past time, way past time. These people are parasites who don't want to live under God's curse to till the ground. So they find ways to take advantage of good people. And they do all sorts of other evil, horrendous shit to obtain the knowledge of how to do this stuff, right? That's why there's a certain client list that hasn't come out and all that, right? They do all sorts of horrendous shit to keep that power, to not have to till the ground and to not have to live under the curse, right? And that's what this is all about. And when they talk about bringing in the golden age of Saturn, yes, go ahead, Chris. You can, yeah, if you want to share a link, shoot, go ahead. I won't be able to click on it, but people in chat will probably appreciate it. But when they talk about bringing in their golden age of Saturn, that's what it is. It's where they literally get to live as Olympians, right? And I know I'm mixing Greek and Roman a little bit here, but to live as Olympians, right? And have all of their wants and needs met by a slave class of subservient peasants, greatly reduced in population, right? And ultimately governed and regulated by a non-human entity, artificial intelligence, that eliminates due process. Oh, now the facial recognition, just seeing you jaywalk, right? And it's already linked to your bank account. Everything's all linked together digitally. You have a digital currency. So there's no due process, no whether or not jaywalking even applies to you. If you're under administration, if you're under the administrative regulations of man, or if you're actually in the private, you don't get to argue any of that because it's all linked to you digitally, and you didn't have a choice about it. And so as soon as you're seen jaywalking across the street, automatic deduction from your bank account. Don't pass go, don't collect $200, nothing, right? So that's where they're going with this. And then, if they get you to integrate this into your body, which is their immediate goal. This is what X and Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and all these guys are working on right now. Is cell phones will be obsolete. You will be your cell phone. Well, why do you think they want that? Because that's the mark, dude. They want to integrate that LEI, legal entity identification, attached to the trust account, that legal fiction. They want to integrate that into your biology so that you are now integrally a creature of the beast and not a creature of God. You now have become, in reality, is this going to sound funny, but in reality, that legal fiction. Now this isn't just a persona you adopt and that you unknowingly agree to. When you go into a courtroom, everywhere you walk, everything that you do, this artificial intelligence governance system is going to recognize you as that account number, as that legal fiction. And you will be trapped in it. And they're going to say, just like it says, that you won't be able to buy or sell unless you adopt this LEI and this digital currency. That's where we're headed. So if there was ever a time for Thomas Jefferson's words to be heeded and implemented, it is now. That's my opinion. So, all right, guys, I appreciate you as always. Oh, he'll need a wrench here. Let me give Chris a wrench real quick, so that he can. So he can share a link. I forgot about that, man. I don't do the comment side of stuff like from inside the comments. It's different on my stream. So let's see. Gotta go to my chat channel. It's so weird. It won't let me go into my own freaking YouTube videos on my YouTube. My YouTube's been bugging you. I'm telling you, YouTube hates all those shorts I've been putting out. So let me mute my microphone for a second while I pull up us on here. All right, I'm back. There we go. That was unnecessarily difficult. For some reason, it won't let me go into my own streams on my phone. But this thing's been acting real buggy lately. So, anyways, as I was saying, I'm going to let him go ahead and put that link in the chat. We got Roger just showed up as I'm shutting down. Sorry about that, Raj. Hopefully, you had fun over at PJ's, though. But I appreciate you guys as always. This is the still the same people as it was in ancient Babylon building the Tower of Babel. It's still the same people who were in Rome and Jerusalem during Jesus's time, money changing and enslaving everyone through taxation and turning them into chattel property essentially under Roman civil law. It's the same system. It hasn't changed at all. It moved from Babel. It went to start Babylon and is Egypt Babylon or Babylon Egypt, however you want to look at Rome. It's all the same pharaonic bloodlines, the same Babylonian black magic, the same everything. They're doing it's all the same. It all goes back to the ancient system of pledging and getting you to agree to be a fiction property. That's what it is. That's what it all is. So all right, did Chris okay. So Chris posted that. Shoot, man, I want that link. What let's see. What did you post as the link? The link above has basically been scrubbed from Google for years. It didn't even show up on my side. Your link didn't even show up over here. Did it show up for anybody else? I don't see it. Very odd. Hold the Line said best stream yet. FE Nation just showed up as well. Good to see you. Yeah, hey Chris, if you can, you should leave that link in the comments on the video after I end the stream. I would be interested to see what you're talking about that's been scrubbed. I like hidden stuff, right? I like hidden stuff too. Show me hidden stuff. No, but all right. Anyways, you guys have an excellent evening. I may stream again tomorrow. We may pick up where we left off. We'll definitely have another short out tomorrow. And as always, I really appreciate that you guys are interested in learning the law because this will only change when people learn what they're doing and how they're doing it. Because the truth is, for the game to be over, just like the meme says, all we have to do is stand up, and it really is that simple. Just know I'm not chattel property. I'm not a United States citizen, not indentured. And guess what? We have more arms in this country than all the world's militaries combined. Millions and millions and millions of them. And that's just the ones they know about. So you guys have an excellent evening, and I will see you next time.